Rabbi, we're on the bottom of DAF Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, and we're on the statement of Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Now, in order for us to understand the following Gemara, we have to just hearken back to what we learned yesterday. And I apologize, there was supposed to be coverage, and I apologize if you were part of a later DAF. Rav Chisda made a statement. There's a machlokas between Rav Chisda and Rabbi Yochanan. If you pick up and leave where you're eating, and you want to change places, or you want to go somewhere else and then come back later and continue your meal, Rabbi Yochanan says, no matter what you ate, as long as you know that you're coming back, you don't have to make a bracha achrona when you leave, and you don't have to make a bracha rishona when you come back. So, if you were eating a salad, which is what a nice Jewish man is supposed to do, he's supposed to eat a nice salad every day, then when you leave to go daven mincha, let's say you realize it's time to daven mincha, and you haven't finished your salad yet, when you come back, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you don't have to make a bracha achrona when you leave, and you don't have to make a bracha rishona when you come back. Comes along Rav Chisda and says it depends. It depends on the food that you're eating. Mm-hmm. If the food is an important food, such that it warrants either a bracha me'ein shalosh or birkas hamazon, which means either an expanded bracha of al hamichya or al haperos or al hagefen, or benching because there was bread in it, or wine, or fruit from Eretz Yisrael, or mizonos, right? So then you've established a kvius, you've established importance in the place where you are, and as such, normally you'd have to make a bracha achrona right there. But by picking up and leaving, you haven't disbanded that kind of eating. So therefore, says Rav Chisda, for that kind of food, it's not necessary to make a bracha achrona when you leave, nor to make a bracha rishona when you come back. But if you're eating a shahakol item, or some kind of fruit where the bracha is simply borena fashos, the very act of getting up sort of dismantles or disbands your sitting down to eat. And therefore, you'd have to make a bracha achrona. You don't have to make a bracha achrona there. You have to make a bracha achrona wherever you find yourself once you've left. And you'd have to therefore make a new bracha rishona if you come back to that place and want to resume eating your salad. Okay, so that's the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Chisda, and we're discussing Rav Chisda at this point. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Man Tana Akiros. Who is the author of the brisa that we're about to see, that even when it comes to things that are important foods, that require a bracha me'ein shalosh or birkas hamazon, even there it is necessary for you to make a bracha achrona before you leave, and a bracha rishona upon your return. Who is the author of that brisa? The Gemara says Rabbi Yehuda. That's Rabbi Yehuda, who says no matter what the food is, whenever you pick up to leave, you got to make a bracha achrona. When you come back, you have to make a new bracha rishona. Tanya, as the brisa says, Chaverim shahayu mesubim va'akru ragleim le'elech lebeis hakneses or lebeis hamedrash. A group of people are sitting down to eat, to recline, and they lift up their feet. Now, lifting up their feet or uprooting themselves, the language itself implies that they're not really supposed to uproot themselves. They do it abruptly and in an unanticipated way because they realize, oh my gosh, we're supposed to be at shul now. So they pick up and run out when they're really supposed to make a bracha achrona. So in that situation, so clearly what we're talking about, as the Gemara will point out momentarily, we're talking about a food which really requires you to make a bracha achrona in the place where you ate because it's a significant food. The food was koveya, it established domain in that place, and yet you had to interrupt in order to go daven or to go learn. So when they leave, they don't need to make a bracha achrona. And when they come back, they don't have to make a bracha rishona. And on that's the Tanakama, but comes along Rabbi Yehuda and says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'med dvar mamurim bizman shehinichu sham miktsas chaverim. Avolo lo hinichu sham miktsas chaverim kishehin yotzin tuna bracha lemafreya uchashen chozrin tuna bracha lechatchila. So Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says that's only true that there's no end bracha and start bracha required is when they left a portion of their friends at the table. So some of them said, "Oi, it's almost shkia. We got to run to shul to daven mincha." And a couple of them say, "Well, I already davened before I came. I knew we were going to be going overtime in this salad eating, or this not salad here. Here we're talking about we're eating bread. We're eating something that's more significant. We're eating mezainis. We're having a suda. So we daven mincha before. So they're going to stay at the table. The other guys are running out to daven mincha. When they come back, that's the only time. Since you left people there, you've created sort of a connection to the table, even in your absence, and therefore you don't have to make a bracha achrona when you leave and a bracha rishona upon your return. But if you didn't leave anyone at the table, so then you've destroyed that kvius, and therefore you'd have to make a bracha achrona before you leave and a bracha rishona upon your return.
What if you left food there?
Doesn't matter. The food is not the criterion; it's the bodies that are the criterion, according to Rebbe Yehuda.
The fact that it uses lashon mesubin, it means it's more of a davar chashuv. I mean, it's
no. The Rashbam says it's not the fact that it says mesubin, but it says va'akru ragleim. To do an akiras raglayim implies that you've landed. In other words, and you unexpectedly and abruptly pick yourself up when you weren't supposed to. No, we don't see any time limit here. There may be time limits involved, but the Gemara will not be discussing that presently. Elataima deba devarim hatunim bracha lachreim b'makom dekshen yotzin etunim bracha lemafreich shen chozim tunim bracha lachatchila. So the Gemara now says, okay, let's go back to the Tanakama for a second. The Tanakama is of the opinion that when you're dealing with something that has chashivas, that's an important food item, that requires a bracha achrona in the place where you ate, only there does the Tanakama say that if you leave, you don't need to make a bracha achrona, and when you return, you don't need to make a bracha rishona. Aval dvarim she'ein tunin bracha la'achrein b'makoman, afilu l'rabbanan keshen yosin tunin bracha la'marfreich shechozin tunin bracha la'chatchila. But it sounds like from this brisa that the Rabbanan agree that if you're dealing with a non-significant food, such that you don't need to make a bracha achrona where you ate because it's not the place that establishes the eating, because it's a minor food item, right? It's a food item that only gets a bori nefashos. So then the Tanakama would also agree that and when you leave you have to make a bracha achrona, and when you return you have to make a bracha rishona. In other words, the point of machlokas, the Gemara is inferring between the Tanakama and Reb Yehuda is only with chashava foods. But when it comes to non-chashava foods, it seems that the Tanakama agrees that when you leave, you need to make a bracha achrona, and when you return, you need to make a bracha rishona. So, lema tihavi tiyufta de Reb Yochanan. Let us therefore say that this brisa is a challenge to Reb Yochanan, who did not distinguish. Remember, I started off by saying there's a machlokas between Reb Yochanan and Reb Chisda. Reb Yochanan from yesterday's Gemara had said, no matter what food you're eating, as long as you plan to return, when you get up, you don't have to make a bracha achrona, and when you return, you don't have to make a bracha rishona. So this brisa seems to say that both according to Rebbe Yehuda and according to the Chachamim, for non-significant foods, you would have to make a bracha achrona when you leave and a bracha rishona upon your return. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, v'lav miosvine chada zimna. But we already brought refutations to Rebbe Yochanan's position that his position is untenable based on another brisa. So what difference does it make if this brisa is a tiyufta to him also? The Gemara says, Lema miha nami tihavi tiyufta. The Gemara says, well, it's always helpful to have a backup refutation. Why? So the Rashbam explains. What if we could find the refutation that was provided yesterday to Rabbi Yochanan? Let's say we could find a counter-argument why that brisa is not a refutation. At least we have this in our back pocket. So it's always helpful to have a secondary refutation to an Amora. So the Gemara says, so let's say that this is our secondary refutation. On the Amar Lacha Rabbi Yochanan, no. Rabbi Yochanan could always tell you this brisa does not refute my position. Why? Because hu adin dafilu devarim sheintun and bracha lachreim b'makoman nami ein tzrichin levarich. Really, I'll tell you that when the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Yehuda, and they say that you don't need to make a bracha achrona when you leave and a bracha rishona when you return, that's not only the case by important foods, but it's even the case by unimportant foods. V'hadikatani akru raglehen, and the reason why it says akru raglehem, which implies, like I was mentioning to Rav David, akru raglehem implies that they abruptly pick up because they were established in their place for eating, which implies they're eating chashuva foods which are koveya makom. Why then dafka did they only talk about that case? Lahodiach hakocho de Rebbe Yehuda. Dafilu dvarim shetunim bracha lachreim b'makoman taman dehinichu mixas chaverim but lenichu mixas chaverim kishen yosim tunim bracha lamafreich shen yosim tunim bracha l'chadchil. It's only to tell you to what extent Rebbe Yehuda disagrees. You see, remember, Rebbe Yehuda is machmir, and he requires a bracha achrona and a new bracha rishona, even when you're dealing with significant foods. So, therefore, maybe the reason why the Chachamim are only discussing significant foods is not because they only disagree with Rebbe Yehuda with significant foods, but rather the point of the Bryce is to tell you to what extent Rebbe Yehuda is machmir to require a bracha achrona and a bracha rishona, even with significant foods, where there's a kviyus makom. Even there, Rebbe Yehuda still says you have to make a bracha achrona when you leave and a bracha rishona upon your return. Okay. Now the Gemara says Tanya kavase de Rav Chisda. But now going back to Rav Chisda's position, remember which is what? Rav Chisda was the one who said it depends on the food. If it's an insignificant food, it's a shahakol, it's a salad, whatever, you need to make a bracha achrona when you leave and a bracha rishona upon your return. Significant foods that we get a bracha me'ein shalosh or birkas hamazon. There you don't have to make a bracha achrona when you leave and a bracha rishona when you return. So the Brisa says as follows: Chaverim shahayu mesubin lishtos yayin. If a group of friends were reclining to drink wine, ve'akru ragleihem v'chazru, and they pick up their feet, you know that same language of abrupt removal from where they were kovei makom, because we're dealing with wine, which is a bracha me'ein shalosh. Yes, so it's a significant food. They pick up, ein tzrichin levarich. They don't have to make a new bracha upon their return. They don't have to make a bracha achrona, and they don't have to make a bracha rishona when they return. This brisa is explicitly only addressing the case of chashuva foods, and you see that it says only by chashuva foods do you not have to make a bracha. By implication, by non-chashuva foods, you would have to make a bracha achrona upon your departure and a bracha rishona upon your return. Tana Rabbana. Now let's go on to another case which is related to the Mishnah in Arvei Psachim. B'nei Chabura. Now remember one of the major discussions of Arvei Psachim from the very Mishnah is you have to stop eating on Erev Pesach by a certain time in order to be able to enter into the Pesach Seder with an appetite, right? So one of the discussions from, I believe it was Kuf Aleph, is what is the halacha when you're eating on Erev Yantif or Erev Shabbos and your meal extends into Shabbos or Yantif. So we have a machlokes here between Rebbe Yehuda and Rebbe Yossi as to what the proper protocol is. Do you have to stop eating or can you continue? And we saw the Shita of Shmuel, who had said that I hold like Rebbe Yossi that you're allowed to continue eating, but I hold that you have to be pores mapa, you have to spread a cloth over and make kiddush and then continue eating, but you don't have to bench. So, b'nei chabura shahayu mesubin v'karash aleim hayom, that if you have a group of friends that are reclining on Erev Shabbos, all of a sudden Shabbos kicks in with, they just protracted their meal. Mevi'in lo koshel yain v'omer lov kedushas hayom, v'sheni omer alav birkas hamazon divrei Rebbe Yehuda. So the halacha is the first person, it could be the same person, it seems like, but the example is being brought of two different people because we're dealing with two different cups of wine. So one of the members of the Chabura says Kiddush. Got to say Kiddush first to demarcate that immediately upon the arrival of Shabbos you immediately have to make Kiddush according to this opinion of Rebbe Yehuda. And the second person, because you're obligated to stop the meal upon the arrival of Shabbos according to Rebbe Yehuda, he says the second person will use a second cup of wine, and you use that for Birkas Hamazon, because you're supposed to use a cup of wine when you bench.
What about the issue of Menachem Kabbalah Shabbat in the middle?
It's a valid question. The Gemara here is not dealing with that issue of tefillah. Maybe they'll daven later. They'll daven Ma'ariv later. Rabbi Yossi Omer Ochel v'holech ad shetechshach. By the way, Kabbalah Shabbos is a relatively new institution. It's only invented in the 16th century. But really, it's just really Mincha and Mahariv. Okay? Rabbi Yossi Omer, Ochel v'holech ad shetechshach. Rabbi Yossi says that you're not obligated to stop the meal. You can continue eating. Just continue eating. Now, do you have to make Kiddush or not? According to Rabbi Yossi, there's no obligation to make Kiddush right away. You'll make Kiddush when it's convenient, but you can continue your meal. Gamru, but if you happen to finish the meal upon the arrival of Shabbos, so then Kos Rishon Mevorech Alav Birkas Hamazon, V'Hasheni Omer Alav Kedushas Hayom. So according to Rabbi Yossi, you're not obligated to demarcate Shabbos' arrival immediately upon the sun going down. And therefore, if you want to, you can bench first, and then you can make Kiddush. But again, you have to use, for cup number 1, you bench, and for cup number 2, you can make Kiddush. The Rashbam just points out that it's not that Rabbi Yossi is saying it dafka has to be that way. Rabbi Yossi says if you want to, you could say Kiddush on cup number 1 and bench on cup number 2. The point that he's trying to make is that I don't require that Kiddush be recited immediately upon the inception of Shabbos, unlike my counterpart Rabbi Yehuda, who says that once you know that Shabbos is here, you must immediately launch into Kiddush. Rabbi Yossi says no, you'll make Kiddush when it's convenient. So either if you want to bench first, you want to make Kiddush second, make Kiddush second, or you can reverse it. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so the Gemara now says, but at least we see, both according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, in both scenarios where you're going to be benching and making Kiddush, you got to use 1 cup for Kiddush and 1 cup for Birkas Hamazon. The Gemara's question is, Amai? What's wrong with having a person use 1 cup of wine to cover both? Use 1 cup of wine for the benching and 1 cup of wine for Kiddush. Why do you need to pour a separate cup of wine? Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav Sheshes, Ein Omrim Shtei Kiddushos Al Kos Echad. You're not allowed to make a recitation of 2 different holy formulas on 1 cup of wine. My taima, Amar of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Lefi she'enos and mitzvos chavilos. The famous idea that you're not allowed to bundle together mitzvahs, because that shows a certain kind of disregard for the mitzvah. If the mitzvah was important to you, so then you'd have a special cup for mitzvah A, a special cup for mitzvah B.
That's why I guess why Sheva Baruch you have different kosas, right?
Yeah, but to group them together is not appropriate. You want to be able to separate them out.
Which says Birchos Hamazon means the same Bar Priya Gofen at the end. Because like Abdullah, we don't say the bracha. We use the same kos.
I see what you're saying. We use 1 kos for Birkas Hamazon. It's a whole special case, because you're sort of a chamer gamel. You're stuck in that situation because you're not allowed to drink. That's why we don't allow you to make a bar priya. It's a good point. But in general, you have to use 2 different kosos for each mitzvah. It's a good question as far as what we do with the Havdalah case, right? So
usually they use the same wine for Havdalah.
Yeah, but we don't make.
That's what Mark was pointing out. Okay, so einam shtei kedushos al kos echad. So because you're not allowed to do mitzvahs chavilos. So the Gemara now says velo. Oh, really? You don't do 2 mitzvahs. You don't bundle 2 mitzvahs together. V'hatanya hanichnas lebeso b'motzoi Shabbos mevorech al hayayin v'al hamoor v'al habesamim. That if a person comes to his house on motzoi Shabbos, first he makes the bracha on wine, and then he makes the bracha on the candle, and then he makes the bracha on the besamim. Now, is that what we do? No, we don't do that order. But that's okay. We'll disregard that part for now. That's not the main point. V'achar kach omer havdalah al hakos, and then afterwards you say the bracha of Baruch Hamavdil. Okay, that's standard havdalah. However, the Brisa says v'im ein lo ela kos echad manicho la'achar hamazon u'mishalshel kulon la'acharov. But if you don't only have 1 cup of wine after Shabbos, let's say you only have enough wine for 1 cup of wine. So there you don't have any other choice, so therefore you group them together. So you see that, and you want to have a malava malka with a kos on Birkas Hamazon for that afterwards, and therefore you have to bundle them together. So you see that we do say osin mitzvahs chavilos. We do bundle mitzvahs together. The Gemara says ein lo shiny. Listen, when you have no other choice because it's only 1 cup of wine, that's different. Then we'll tell you, listen, when there's no other option, then you do bundle them together. Frak the Gemara, but wait a minute. V'hayom tov shechalios achar hashabbos di'islay. What about a yontif that falls out on Motzoi Shabbos? It falls out on Sunday. Saturday night on Sunday is a yontif. And we know that there's a special part of Kiddush that you recite when yontif starts on Saturday night. That you make Havdalah within the Kiddush itself. V'amar Rav yaknaha. And Rav says that the order is Yayin, Kiddush, Ner, and Havdalah. So you see that what? You see that you bundle together both the Kiddush and the Havdalah on 1 kos. And presumably you have more than one kos at the beginning of Yantiv. So Amri Midalo Amr Zman Michal de Bishvishal Pesach Askinan de Kol Mai de Havalei Achilei Veleslei. So the Gemara says, no. Look, why didn't Rav, when he was talking about the proper order of what you're supposed to do, why didn't he include the bracha of Shehechianu? Normally we're used to the acronym of Yaknahaz, right? Here he only says Yaknaha. What happened to Zayin, which stands for Zman, which means the bracha of Shechianu? The fact that he did not include that means that Rav is not talking about the first night of Yom Tov falling out on a Saturday night. He's talking about the last night of Pesach, which is when you don't say a Shechianu, and maybe that taka in that situation you run out of wine. Whereas if we were talking about the first night of Pesach, you can't say you run out of wine. You got to have 4 kosas. There's always going to be wine. There's an abundance of wine in the house. But on the last night of Pesach, maybe taka, you only have 1 cup, and that's why you're allowed to bundle them together. But wait a minute. Okay, fine, says the Gemara. You can't challenge me from that. But wait a minute. V'hayom tov rishon de islay, v'amar Abaye yak zana, v'rava amar yak nahaz. But 1 second. Okay, fine. But there's an explicit machlokas between Abaye and Rava as to whether the order on saying Kiddush Motzoi Shabbos is Yain Kiddush Zman Ner Havdalah. At where do you place the Shehechianu? Do you place it right after Kiddush, or do you place it after everything, where you say Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah and then Zman and then Shehechianu? So clearly in this machlokas they're debating the first night of Yantiv because there's Shehechianu involved. There's got to be an abundance of wine, so you can't tell me the reason why you're bundling together is because you only have 1 cup. So Ella Havdalah v'Kiddush Chada Milsi Birkas Hamazon v'Kiddush Trei Milininu. Concludes the Gemara that you're right. The only time when you don't say when you say that you don't bundle mitzvahs together is if the mitzvahs are disparate mitzvahs. One is a mitzvah to thank God for the food you've just eaten, and the other kos is for sanctifying the day. So those are 2 totally different genres of mitzvah, and therefore you're not supposed to bundle them together. But Kiddush and Havdalah are the same genre of mitzvah. One, they both demarcate either the entry or the departure of the sanctification of the day. And therefore, it's logical to group them together and use them over 1 kos, because they're both discussing, especially when you're transitioning from Shabbos into Yantiv, they're both demarcating essentially the same thing. That when you say Havdalah from Shabbos to Yantiv, say Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh, you're distinguishing between one sanctity and another sanctity. And the same thing, when you're making Kiddush, you're talking about the new sanctity of Yom Tov. It's really essentially the same discussion, and therefore it is appropriate to use 1 kos. Now let's go back. Now let's go and discuss this whole issue of when you're not making Shehechianu, but it is a Yom Tov that comes right after Shabbos. What is the proper order? We have 4 things, because we're leaving out Shehechianu now. Yain, Kiddush, Ner, and Havdalah. Making the bracha of Bori Pri Agafen, making the bracha on the sanctity of Yom Tov, making a bracha on Ner, on the light, and making bracha on Havdalah, of demarcating that it's no longer Shabbos. What is the proper order? Now there's one thing that we've left out conspicuously. Can you know, what have we left out? Besides Shechianu, what else? We left out Besamim. So here you have a very important machlokas, and I want you to just store it in your memory banks because we won't be able to analyze it today. Why is there no besamim mentioned over here? The answer is because you don't smell besamim when you're making Havdalah from Shabbos to Yom Tov. So the question is, why not? The Rashbam says, because on Yom Tov there is also a Neshama Yisera. The whole reason why we smell besamim on Motzoi Shabbos is to bring us back to ourselves after our Neshama Yisera leaves. But on Yom Tov, since there's also Neshama Yisera, you don't need besamim, because you're going from Shabbos to Yom Tov. Frek Tosfos. If that's the case, then why don't you need besamim when you make Havdalah after Yom Tov? It's a good question, right? So therefore, Tosfos concludes that there really is no Neshama Yisera on Yom Tov. And the only reason why you don't have besamim is because you're going to have valid substitutes for besamim. Since you're going to be... No, it's Yantif. You're not going to have chulin. It's Yantif, so you'll have good food, you'll have good wine, you'll have gefilte fish, right? You'll have challah with honey, whatever you're going to have, or matzah. you'll have some good stuff to revive you, even though your Neshama Yisera is leaving. So this, on a theological level, is quite significant. Is there a Neshama Yisera or not on Yantiv? We'll leave that discussion for now, but there's a lot to be said on this topic. Okay? And of course, how are we going to explain the Rashbam? How can the Rashbam say that there is a Neshama Yisera when there's no Besamim on Motzai Yantiv? Okay, leave that aside for now. Gufa. So Yom Tov Shechalios Achar Hashabis, Rav Amar Yaknaha, Ushmuel Amar Yanahak, Rabba Amar Yahanak. Let's see, how many are we up to now? 3. Levi Amar Kanaya. 4. Rabbanan Amri Kayana. 5. Marbarei de Ravina Amar Nakaya. That's 6. And Marta Amar Mishmei de Rabbi Yeshua Nayahak. 7. 7 different opinions. You didn't even think it was possible. But I guess if you have four possibilities of the order of 4 different items, 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 was 24 different permutations, I suppose. So at least we don't have to suffer through 24 machloiksim. But we have a 7-way machlokes and what the proper order is. Now, fortunately, we have the Rashbam to explain to us what the basis of this 7-way machlokes. We're going to run through it very quickly, and then we'll be done. Okay, so Rab says Yaknaha. Why do you make a bracha on Borei Pri Hagafen first before everything else? Because of Tadr V'Sheno Tadr Tadr Kodem. Since it's the most frequent bracha that you make because you drink wine all the time, that bracha gets to be said first. Kiddush has to precede Havdalah according to Rav, because if you were to make Havdalah before you make Kiddush, you would be showing that it's almost like a burden for you. You can't wait to get rid of Shabbos. Let's get rid of Shabbos. Quick, get rid of Shabbos, and now we'll make Kiddush on Yom Tov. No, you want to show that Shabbos is dear to you, so first make Kiddush on Yom Tov, and then you can say Havdalah on Shabbos. And Ner, of course, is sandwiched in between Kiddush and Havdalah, because since you're making Havdalah at the end, and the whole purpose of the Ner is for Havdalah, so it only makes sense to put the Ner immediately before Havdalah. So that's the reason for Yain, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah. Now let's go to Shmuel. Shmuel disagrees, and he says Yanahak. He says it's more logical to make Havdalah before Kiddush, because after all, as we'll see, the Gemara will give us the following analogy. If you have a king leaving and the prime minister of the king is coming in, it's only proper courtesy, proper etiquette to escort the king out and then welcome in the prime minister. So since Shabbos is more chashuv than Yantiv, take care of Shabbos leaving before you take care of Yantiv coming in. And so therefore he says Yanahak. And of course, Yain is first because of Tadir. Ner comes right before Havdalah because it's related to Havdalah. And then Kiddush at the end. Those are the 2 simplest ways to understand it, okay? Rabba Amar Yahanak. Rabba explains that you have to have Yain first because of Tadir, then Havdalah, because he holds like Shmuel who says get rid of Shabbos before you take care of Yantiv. But his difference is that he says the Ner is supposed to come after the Havdalah and before Kiddush. Now, why is that? So Rabba holds that you have to make a distance between Havdalah and Kiddush in some way. You have to demarcate between the two, because in certain respects they contradict each other. So you have to create a buffer between the two of them, because Havdalah shows that you're leaving Kedusha, and Kiddush shows that you're ushering in Kedusha. So in order to create some kind of buffer between them, put the bracha on the Ner between Havdalah and Kiddush. Okay, Levi Amar Kanaya. Levi says, I hold like Rav, who says that Kiddush on Yantiv should be said before Havdalah. So then why? And he says you need to put a buffer of Ner between Kiddush and Havdalah. But why does he put Yain before Havdalah and not put Yain before Kiddush? The Rashbam explains, because the Yain is vital for Havdalah, but wine is not vital for Kiddush, because you can make Kiddush if you don't have wine, you can make Kiddush on bread. So therefore, since it's more vital for Havdalah than it is for Kiddush, put the bracha on wine before the Havdalah. Rabbanan Amri Kayana, they are very similar to Levi, they just switch the Yain and the Ner, they switch them, because they say, look, and like the Rashbam explains on Kayana, Svirle Karab, they hold like Rab that you're supposed to make Kiddush before Havdalah, and Verotzanam Lismoch Yain Lavdalah Tfei Mi Kiddush. And you also want to put Yain closer to Havdalah than you do to Kiddush. Hilkach Kiddush Bereisha, the Hadar Kol Seder Havdalah Shal Seder Shalmot Kol Motzoi Shabbos Avi Yain Ma'or Havdalah. And then since you want to do the proper order, since normally in most weeks yayin comes before ner, so therefore here too, first make kiddush, the bracha on kiddush, and then do the proper order of what you would normally do for Havdalah, which is yayin first, then ner, and then Havdalah. Mar berei de Ravna Amar Nakaya. He says ner goes all the way at the beginning, and then kiddush, then yayin, and then Havdalah. And his svara is that if you were to make a Borei Marei Ha'esh independent of any other bracha, that's fine. But Kiddush has to always be accompanied by wine, and Havdalah always has to be accompanied by wine. So, in other words, it has to be accompanied by something, right? So therefore, it makes more sense to make Kiddush and Havdalah equally adjacent to Yayin. So therefore, put Ner at the very beginning, since it can be made independently. It doesn't have to be adjacent to any other bracha. And make Kiddush and Havdalah adjacent to the yayin, and put yayin in between to act as a buffer between the two of them.
But then isn't that bundling? The yayin? The yayin...
We already established this is not a problem of bundling.
But
remember we said...
Things. No, I know, but there's two different things.
What do you mean?
Well, Kiddush is for Yontif and Havdalah is for sure.
But we established that that's not a problem of chavilos. Remember? We said chavilos is only a problem when there's two genres of bracha. Here they're both on Kedushas Hayom. Remember? Okay? So, Mar Tamar Mishmei de Rabbi Yehoshua Nayahak. And finally, for the last opinion, we have Marta who says that it is Nayahak. First Ner, because again, you want to make sure that that's independent. That could be an independent bracha. And like Rashi explains, Rashbam explains, to Havdalah Kodem LeKiddush. First, you have to make Havdalah before Kiddush, like Rav had said. You want to put yayin before Havdalah and Kiddush. Below yayin. He says that it's better to put yayin first to make it right after the ner. Ner goes independent. Ner can be independent of any bracha, so it goes first. And then you make the bracha on yayin, so that the yayin should be sort of said before both Havdalah and Kiddush. And and therefore, he says nayahak. He doesn't require that buffer between Havdalah and Kiddush like the other mandam are before him. So therefore, nayahak. Okay? So those are the 7 opinions, and we will continue this discussion in Mir Hashem tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.